I absolutely love Star Trek: The Next Generation, one of my all-time favorite shows. It might be my favorite show. I wanted to jump back. I heard a story about how you got involved on that show, and it's so crazy, and I just can't imagine that it would ever happen again in today's world. So how did you get involved? I want to make sure what I heard is actually accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I was living in Los Angeles, trying to be a writer, and basically, I started dating a girl who had a connection to Star Trek: The Next Generation, and she found out I was a Star Trek fan because I had Captain Kirk posters in my apartment. And she said, "Oh, I still know people over there. I could get you a tour of the sets." And they used to have a regular set tour, like once a week. They would take people on the Star Trek sets because so many people wanted to do it. And so she made a call and said, they said, sure, you can get on the tour and it'll be in about 6 weeks. So I just decided I was going to shot, and I sat down and wrote an episode, and I tucked it under my arm and I brought it with me on the set tour. And I convinced the guy that was giving the set tour, his name was Richard Arnold, to read the script. And he liked it and gave it to my first agent. And Richard was one of Gene Roddenberry's assistants. So the agent submitted it to the show formally. It sat in the slush pile for about 7 months. And then Michael Piller, the late Michael Piller, came aboard at the beginning of the third season, looking for material, started going through the slush pile, found the script, bought it, produced it, asked me to write a second one. I did a second one. And then after that, he brought me on staff, and I was there for 10 years. It was a very lucky, amazing break, that I got. I was very young. I was like 25.
It's crazy that happened because it's so. I mean, Star Trek: The Next Generation had a very unusual. They had a different policy where people could submit scripts, or that was the case, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of responsible for that because after Michael found my script, Michael decided, oh, this is a great resource. We should, open the gates up to the fan community and people that want to write for the show. So he negotiated a deal with the Paramount lawyers where if you filled out this release form, anybody could submit a script to the show. And so we started getting like 3,000 scripts a year. And we had like at least 5 full-time script readers who did nothing but read Next Generation scripts, and then wrote up coverage on every script. And then every week, the writers, of which I was one at that point, would get this stack of spec scripts with coverage, and we would have to read the coverage, and then people would be invited. There was maybe 1 or 2 scripts that were purchased outright after me. I think Tin Man was a script that was purchased, and then there were a couple of stories that were purchased. But there were a lot of writers that came in and pitched for the first time because of that, and some of them sold stories. Brian Fuller, I believe, got his start that way, and Jane Espenson, I believe, also.
It's amazing. You, I believe, worked on 27 scripts on Next Generation. What was it like back then? Because nowadays, the modern technology, the way we're talking to each other, modern computers, the way people can work is so different than it was back in the 80s and early 90s. What was it like writing for a show like that when the technology was just so different?
It was amazing. I mean, you have to remember, it sounds antiquated now, but at the time we were all working on what was state-of-the-art equipment, or at least we thought it was. I worked on a Mac at home, but they didn't have Macs at the studio, so we had to use these IBM PCs, and they were like black screens with amber lettering at the beginning, and the big 5.5-inch floppy disks. And then graduated to color monitors and the 3.5-inch discs. Still didn't have them networked together. There was no internet. You had to, if you want something printed out, you had to take the disc down 4 flights of stairs, give it to the script coordinator. They would do the printouts for you and take it back up. Changes were done on the margins, handwritten in the script, and then you gave it to the script coordinator to actually type in the changes. But it was a point of transition. There was still a secretarial pool, a typing pool at Paramount, which meant there were women that were in that pool who had been typing scripts for literally decades. And if you wrote your script in longhand, you could send it to the secretarial pool, and they would type it up in the right format and send it back to you the same day. It was like, it was literally a survivor of like the era going back to I Love Lucy when they would do stuff like that. So it was really something. And, the internet came in while I was at Star Trek, and working on Star Trek, we were always very interested in technology. And so there were first adopters among all of us. Different people were buying new computers and Macs and upgrades. And, people started talking about the internet, and it was feeding our sort of techno-centric kind of view of the universe, or a view of the future. So we always were sort of trying to get the latest and greatest stuff. AOL was a big deal, and all the stuff at the primeval era of the internet happened while I was at Star Trek. The first message boards and fan communication changed pretty profoundly once the internet came through, and it was a fascinating time.
One of the things about Star Trek, the show did, I think, 20-something episodes a year, which is a massive beast of a production for a sci-fi show. What was it like in terms of each season trying to figure out the ultimate arc? How much was it changing on the fly? I'm just curious about the way you guys developed the seasons back then.
Well, in Next Gen, you have to remember, it was very episodic. This was before the era of television embraced story arcs and character arcs. There was a mandate. The studio was very adamant that it did not want continuity between the episodes, because we were a first-run syndication show. It went out straight to the local syndicated stations, and those stations wanted the ability to show them in whatever order they wanted to. They didn't want to have to get locked into a certain a pattern of showing. And the studio was frankly afraid that, if viewers tuned into episode 4 of a 5-episode arc and they went, oh, I missed the first 3. Well, screw it, I'm not going to watch any of this. So it was a very different mindset, right? So when we were developing the show, you weren't doing arcs. You at the beginning of the season, we were doing 26 a year, which sounds crazy now, but we were doing 26 episodes. And you would just start putting up one-line things of concepts for episode on a big board. And you were mostly looking for a variety of storytelling. You were trying not to do 2 mysteries in a row. You were trying not to do two Picard stories in a row. You were saying, okay, we'll do this Picard, then we're going to do a Beverly story, then we'll do a Worf story, then we'll do another Picard story. Then, you were mixing it up in terms of the characters and the style of storytelling. It's too many time travel episodes this season. Let's not do that one here. Let's do that one next year. We're going to do 1 Q episode, okay, we're going to do 1 Borg episode. It was really about diversity of storytelling and the rhythm of it, so that you weren't doing the same kind of show right in a row. So with that many episodes, we never mapped out the whole season ahead of time. You were always trying desperately to keep ahead of production. And there would always come a point in the filming of each season where you were pretty much hand to mouth, where you were writing them and they were shooting them, and you're writing and shooting. And it's just like you were just barely keeping ahead of the camera at certain times. And then you'd have episodes that were disasters or got thrown out for whatever reason. It had to be completely reconceptualized, and they're on the stage. And there was a tremendous pressure cooker in the staff room. And as a result, you never got that far ahead. At the beginning of the season, you might map out the first 5 or 6 episodes, and then you have to start writing them. And then time is clicking. And so you get a chance to start breaking the next couple of episodes in the next one, and maybe using some freelance writers to plump out the writers you got. But again, you just know it, and then it's just you're just trying desperately to get a script out in time to prep next week and shoot the following week, and it's just going like this, because they were also short shooting schedules. We shot an episode in 7 days. 7 days is really tight. So that means you only had 7 days of prep before you had to start shooting. So it was like boom, boom. It was a relentless kind of schedule. And because it was my first gig, it was my first time working in television, I didn't know any better. And I just thought this was normal. And this was like, okay, I just got to get with the program because everyone else is doing it. And that's how I learned. I just learned by like, okay, this is normal TV, and we just have to really work really hard as writers all the time. And because Star Trek never really worried about the ratings. I mean, the ratings were always great, and there was no network because it was first run syndication. We never really worried about getting here. So we always kind of rolled into the next season. Once we finished shooting season 4, each writers would get 2 weeks break, and then we'd be back in 5 while doing post-production on season 4. It's a routine that never really stopped.
There's a slight hiccup with the internet on your end, but it worked at the end there. Did you have a favorite character to write for on Next Gen?
No, I mean you learn to write for all of them, and I enjoyed writing for all of them. They all had different graces, and they had different reasons to write for them. I mean, it was fun to write Data because of the Data's humor. It was fun to write the big sort of Klingon stories for Worf, and Picard had the moral, ethical dilemmas. There was always something you could grab onto as a writer. So no, there weren't really any favorites that I had. It was just fun to write for the whole cast.
I think All Good Things, the series finale of Next Generation, is a straight up masterpiece. It's
Okay.
it's incredibly difficult to end anything, to give resolution to characters and make people happy. I fucking, sorry for the language. I love that episode. Can you talk about, because you were one of the people responsible for that one, can you sort of talk about what it was like writing the series finale, and did it ever almost end up being something else?
Well, it's interesting. Brandon Braga and I co-wrote it, and we were writing Star Trek Generations at that point, and we'd been working on Generations for almost a year. And there was an assumption among all of us on the writing staff that Michael Piller was going to want to write the finale of the show himself. And ultimately, Michael was busy with Deep Space Nine, and I think he was even working on Voyager at that point, and decided that he was going to have Brandon and I write it. And we were thrilled and excited, but it was also like right in the middle of working on Generations. So suddenly it was like this double load that we had to do. And we were doing two-hour pieces about the exact same characters on the exact same ship. And there were times when we were working on a script, like an engineering problem with Geordi and Data talking about how to tech the tech for the warp drive, and we would get lost in which story this was. Like, which way is this, the movie, or is this the TV show? And the great irony of it all is that we spent like 4 weeks working on All Good Things, and we spent a year working on Generations, and All Good Things turned out so much better. It's just like one of those crazy lessons that you learn as a writer. But to answer your question, no, it wasn't really ever going to be something else. It was always pretty much about the three stages of a man's life, which was Michael's idea. I think Brandon and I had pitched. There were various pitches on what it could have been, but it never came close. Michael pretty much locked into this notion of visiting all three periods of the captain's life, of getting the Enterprise at the beginning, of what it was today, and his life in the distant future. So that that core concept kind of locked in, it never really changed, radically after that.
Do you remember who came up with the idea of Picard joining the crew to play poker?
I don't. I think that might have been even earlier. I think that the notion that we were going to end the show with the poker game was something I think we talked about in the writers' room for quite a while. So I think that was always like, yeah, and it'll somehow, whatever it is, it's going to end in the poker game.
Jumping off of Next Generation, I want to go into DS9. I love also DS9. It was one of those fully formed shows right at the beginning, and I thought it had its own mission, its own everything. Do you feel like DS9 has gained so much more respect now than when it was on the air? Or am I just mistaking this?
No, I think that's accurate. That's certainly my observation. And when we were on the air, we definitely felt like we were the forgotten stepchild of the Star Trek franchise. The Next Gen had become this iconic thing, and Voyager was going to be the big new show, and that we were like the middle child, and we were the weird child, and we were the one that the show that didn't go anywhere, and the space station stayed in one place and had these long political and religious overtones to it, and it wasn't real Star Trek, to a lot of people, and the studio kind of shrugged at us too. We're like, yeah, I know, it's fine. They were sort of wanting it to be a bigger deal, like closer to what Next Gen was. But those of us worked on the show, we just had faith in what we were doing, and we told ourselves at the time, they'll love us one day. One day it's going to be special, and it'll do really, it'll go down well in memory. And it's nice to see that that's true. I think the show has aged well, and I think we were doing long character stories and character arcs on Deep Space Nine. And it was kind of the first time of us doing that. And we had to force our way into doing that and really kind of overcome a lot of opposition to it. Because again, people just didn't do that kind of storytelling in the 1 hour drama format unless you were a soap opera in those days. And now all of 1 hour drama kind of moves in that direction. So people that do discover Deep Space Nine now start to pick up, and there's this long character arcs, and there's these ongoing plots and stories, and it feels a little bit, ahead of its time.
I think that's one of the reasons why it stands up so well, is those long character arcs. You joined I want to say in season 3 or 4. I could be wrong about that.
Season 3.
Okay, so what was it like? Because you obviously you leave Next Generation, you're working on the movie. Did you immediately want to jump into DS9, or was it one of these things where it's like they're offering you a job, stable employment? I mean, because it seems daunting to jump from all of that Star Trek into even more Star Trek.
Oh, well, you got to remember, I was a Star Trek fan. So I was like a big fan. This was like, a godsend to be on the show at all. So as Next Gen was winding down, I wanted to remain in the Star Trek universe. And the question was, where would I go? Would I go to Deep Space Nine, or would I go to Voyager, which was just coming together at that point? Michael Piller brought me down to his office to talk about it. And it was his idea that I should take a look at Deep Space, because he thought it would play more to my strengths. I liked darker stories and more ambiguous characters. And he could tell, there were things I struggled against on Next Gen about making the characters more ambiguous and less morally clear on some areas and more continuing storylines. And he said, I think you should take a look at Deep Space. And also Ira Bear, who I'd worked with on the 3rd season of Next Gen, was now running the writer's room at Deep Space. And I loved Ira and really wanted to work with him again. So the combination of those factors became like, maybe I should give Deep Space a chance. And I sat down and watched a lot of the episodes. I mean, when I was working on Next Gen, I didn't really watch a lot of Deep Space. I'd seen the pilot, and maybe I'd seen an episode here and there, but Star Trek is the show was so all consuming. When I got home and I was going to relax and watch something else, I didn't want to watch more Star Trek. It was like doing something else. So I really hadn't seen the first 2 seasons in any great detail. But when I started watching it, I was really interested in the characters and in the setting and the space station and the geopolitics that were going on with Bajor and the Federation. And it really appealed to me. And so I decided to go to Deep Space.
One of the things about Deep Space Nine, it pushed more boundaries than Next Generation did. I believe it was Star Trek's first same-sex kiss. Yep. It dealt with a lot of stuff. Did you, at the time, was there less resistance from the studio in terms of putting this material out there? Did you have resistance in terms of trying to do things that had never been done before?
Yeah, I mean, we were pushing the envelope, and there were definitely, you had to sort of overcome, fear. It was all about fear. There were fearful executives at Paramount that weren't sure we should do that. But, we fought the good fight on it, and we won. And we were always trying to push the boundaries of what Star Trek was. I think that was something that the writers on staff saw as our core mission. Let's push Star Trek. Let's see how far Star Trek can go. Let's see what the boundaries of it are, and then let's push them further. So we were always looking for ways to sort of try to do something new.
Did you experience the same kind of, in the writer's room, DS9 also had to churn out a lot of content. Was it the same experience where you were just rushing through it, or was it at that point any easier?
It was easier in that, it was a more stable writing staff. When I started Next Gen, the writing staff in the first 2 years of Next Gen have been very chaotic. There had been a tremendous amount of turnover. Writers had been fired or quit and kept churning for well into the 4th season. And then at the end of the 4th season and into the 5th of Next Gen, it started to become more cohesive, and it settled down. And then on Deep Space, it was much more stable. Some writers came and went, but it was a much more stable group, and we all had worked together for quite some time. So it was easier in that sense. But we were still plotting this giant thing. So it always felt like we could never plot out all 26 at the beginning of the year. You could get maybe 10 of them, and have an idea of where things like the Dominion War was going to go, or what Worf's his first season arc might be. So you had a sense of confidence and experience that allowed you to do it. But still, by the end of the season, it was still very hand to mouth, and you were sweating the production dates, and you were desperately trying to get rewrites out the door, and it was difficult. It was a treadmill at a certain point.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned about DS9 is that you had these season-long arcs. And so did you ever have, at the beginning of, say, season 5, the end of season 5 in mind? Or was it sort of like, did you ever have those long-ranging arcs figured out? Or was it always like, we'll see where it goes?
It was pretty much we'll see where it goes. I think in Deep Space Nine, in the last 2-3 seasons, we might have said, here's where we want to be at the end of the year. And then just stake that out as like a target that we were going to get to, but didn't really have the fundamental arc along the way. So we would have sort of a long range idea of what the season 5 and 6, endings were, and then obviously what the finale was generally going to be. But it wasn't. We just didn't have the time to really map out that kind of stuff in detail because so much would change too. It was also, if you spent the time to map out a 26 episode arc and then started writing it, chances are the first couple episodes would go through so much change and so much tumult, for production reasons, for story reasons, for notes, for all kinds of stuff, that there would be a huge domino effect through all 26. So it was almost like wasted effort to really do a great amount of detailed work like that when we knew the first episodes would, by their nature, go through a lot of change.
Did you take home any props or souvenirs from either Next Gen or DS9?
Yeah, I have a bottle of Saurian brandy from Quark's Bar. I've got some props from the bar, from Dr. Bashir's office, and I have, if you remember, in Next Generation, there used to be the big gold ships on the wall in the conference in the observation room of all the Enterprises. I have all the Enterprises.
Really?
I did. I saved them. I saved them literally from the dumpster.
It's amazing to me. I've heard stories about what they threw out, and it's amazing to me that that it was thrown out. There are so many fans that would have been like, "I'll take it. Please give it to me."
Well, that's what happened. I mean, I got this call. Michael Okuda, who was worked in the art department, was one of our great graphic artists and did all kinds of stuff, just called me up and said, "Ron, they're throwing out the gold chips. If you want them, come get them." And I was like, "I'll be right down." And I pulled my car in and took every single one of them.
Are they in your house? Do you have them on display?
I have them in my office. I had them mounted up on the wall in my office in the same pattern that they used to be in the observation lounge.
Please, I know you don't use social media, but can you please tweet a photo just so some of us can see it?
I might have tweeted a photo of it at some point. I thought I did. Maybe I didn't. I'll find one.
If you did, I'm not on Twitter all the time. I'm sure people have missed it. I would be more than happy to look at it now.
Okay.
I have to ask, this is my last Star Trek thing, but have you watched Discovery, Picard? Have you watched the Star Trek shows that have come on since your time? Or do you sort of like, I can't look at these?
I've seen them. I enjoyed Picard very much. I was invited to the premiere. That was a very lovely gesture that they made, and it was great. It was really. I was surprised how emotionally satisfying it was to see Patrick, in that role again. It really made me like, wow, this is really kind of cool watching him be Jean-Luc again. The same with Brent and Jonathan, and it was like, wow, it meant a lot to see them up doing those roles. It was very cool.